This is my Dell Latitude D600 that I got in January of this year. It was a pretty unexciting, boring, old business laptop thing that ran Windows XP. It had a Pentium M 1.6 GHz CPU, ATI Mobility Radeon 9000 graphics, and 1 GB of RAM. And that's about it. Otherwise, it didn't have a hard drive or anything, but when I put one in and installed Windows XP, it seemed like everything was fine. I did also have to replace the DVD drive, but otherwise that was really the only change I had to make to this computer. I've actually been using this computer quite a bit on my own time, particularly using it for old Windows XP things since it's a laptop, it's easy to set up. I've also been using it for other OS testing and stuff. I've been using it so much that the hard drive I put in this computer is now failing. You see, what happened the other day is I was going to make a backup of the drive, which is a pretty common activity with any computer I own. For a variety of reasons, I make a lot of image backups. The most recent time I tried to do that with this computer, however, it threw an error because it couldn't read from the drive properly. So I checked the smart data of the drive since I wasn't in the room when it happened, and sure enough, there was a single sector on the drive that is failing. Now the drive still technically works fine, but that was enough to throw off my backup. So I wasted no time in coming up with a replacement. When I got this computer, I put in this Western Digital Scorpio thing, mostly because it was just the best IDE hard drive that I had. Not that that's really saying a whole lot, because it's still an IDE hard drive that's 5400 RPM. More so that any other hard drive I had just wasn't going to be nearly as good. But now this one is starting to have problems, so I don't really trust it. And to be honest, I don't really want a spinning hard drive in this computer anyway. It's pretty slow as is. So I wanted to try something different with this computer. Before I pull it out though, of course, I want to get some numbers. I wanted to see how fast this old hard drive was. First off, with Crystal Disk Mark, it seems like my claim to myself that this is the best IDE laptop hard drive that I own has at least a bit of merit to it, I suppose, given it scored higher than any other IDE hard drive I've shown on the channel so far, and even faster than other drives like the SATA drive in the ThinkPad T60. So if it went into something else, it probably wouldn't be completely horrible as long as it doesn't develop more bad sectors. Obviously, these speeds aren't anything by modern standards, but still, you have to compare what you have, and this thing blows any other drive from this time out of the water, which is probably more to do with how crap my hard drives are. I also ran PCMark 04, not because I have any data on any other machine for this, but because it has a hard drive benchmark in it, so I thought we could compare it to the new drive we're putting in this machine. This old hard drive earns a PCMark score of 3879. Now something else that's a big problem with this drive, and we'll see if it's any improvement with the new drive, is the thermals of it are pretty horrible. This makes sense as soon as you actually look at the computer, since it's a spinning hard drive that's being shoved into a hole with no ventilation. So this is not really that surprising. Finally, while I was being productive, I wanted to make another backup of the drive since my existing Windows XP one wasn't showing up anyway, and I wanted to see if the drive could still make a backup, and it seems like it can, so long as there isn't too much data on the drive. But considering that I have had issues trying to make backups of the drive, that's a pretty big disqualifying factor for me with a specific drive, so it's getting replaced. Since this is a business laptop, getting to the hard drive is extremely easy. It's accessible on the side of the computer. However, I probably complained about this in the original video, to actually pull the hard drive out is a bit weird because you have to pop open the lid enough and then pull the drive out, because they designed the caddy with this lip on it so the display will block the caddy from pulling out unless you pop the lid. Amazing. Here's another look at the problem child if you're curious. This drive, for all I know, could still be fine. I just don't really trust it in this computer. I might throw it in something else and see if it ends up having any more problems. But anyways, if you didn't catch earlier, what I bought is an mSATA to IDE adapter. This is something I've been suggested to use a lot, especially in things like the M6805. So I wanted to give this kind of thing a try in something like this, and if this goes well, this is something I will probably consider for more systems in the future. This isn't a particularly rare thing either. This was just a pretty random one I found on eBay, mostly because it also comes with a shell, which is pretty important with how the drive mounts in this computer. Also, I bought this particular one since it was shipping from the US. I've had this light-on 256GB mSATA drive sitting around for a long time. I have no idea if it works because I don't own a single computer with an mSATA slot, but if it does work, it means this would be a pretty cheap replacement for the hard drive at just over 13 bucks. Installation is fairly straightforward, and this one even came with a bag of screws for the PCB. Just to be safe, I plugged the drive into my computer just to make sure it worked. As soon as I plugged it in, the drive got warm, which is a good sign, and Windows detected it with no problems. I was able to initialize the drive and seemed like everything was all good. It was when I was unplugging the drive that I noticed it seems the PCB was not fully trimmed all the way, so there was this extra bit hanging off the side. I didn't think anything of this at first, but it turns out it was preventing the PCB from fully fitting in to the shell, which was less than ideal since it was bending the PCB. So very carefully, I had to trim the PCB in order to get it to fit into the shell, which is, well, I already said it, it's less than ideal. But then it just screws into the plastic shell, and then we have an IDE SSD. You wouldn't even know what's going on inside. If you saw my original video, you might remember that this computer uses a proprietary hard drive adapter. Personally, I hate these things. They're always a pain to take on and off, and in a lot of cases, they will eventually just break. It doesn't help when it's on a hard drive like this where all of the pins are completely screwed up. But fortunately, the adapter fits just fine with the shell, which is something I was a bit worried about. So now it's just a matter of putting it into the computer, or at least I tried to. I noticed the shell definitely was big. It was extremely tight in the caddy, and trying to put it in the computer, it didn't fit in all the way. It was sticking out more than the old hard drive, but it seemed to go in. So does it work? Nope. I took the drive out just to make sure, but it still wasn't powering on. It turns out I wasn't holding the power button down enough. Not sure how I made that mistake. Alright, take two. Does it detect the SSD? Well, first I had to sit through a full memory test, because Dell, but when it finally loaded, still nothing. Okay, I'm gonna do what I can to try and keep this brief. It did eventually show up in the BIOS when I took the PCB out of the shell and just put it into the bay. But obviously, that's not going to cut it since it's just floating in there. I tried it again with the shell, but it just wasn't working. I even put a spudger in there just to make sure it wasn't shorting out since there's some metal bits directly below the hard drive bay, but I was beginning to worry that this shell was just not going to work in this computer. I'd looked online and found a Reddit thread of somebody who had done the exact same thing and it worked perfectly fine in theirs, so I didn't see why it wouldn't work in this machine, but a lot of what I was trying just wasn't working. But eventually, I got one that did. The solution appeared to be mounting the drive even more forward than normal. Of course, this meant it stuck out more than before, but finally, it showed up in the BIOS. If I had to guess, it's just likely not making a good enough connection. I don't know a whole lot about the connector used in this machine, but it likely needs a pretty good connection, and, well, that just wasn't happening with the way the drive was mounting out of the box. It seemed like once I really shoved it in there, it would eventually connect. But this is obviously not really a great sign. I apologize for the crappy camera angle, but I really didn't want to move the computer at all since I wasn't sure how stable the connection between the drive and the board was. But since it showed up in Windows, I attempted to restore my backup I just made to the drive. Keyword there being attempt. It didn't pick up my hard drive at all. It just wouldn't detect the partition on my hard drive. At this point, I then had another panic moment thinking my hard drive just corrupted itself. But no, I just had to plug it into my actual computer, let it do a disk check, and then it worked fine. So, whew, crisis averted, I guess. Now, I don't know how good this mSATA drive is since, like I said, I don't own a computer with an mSATA slot, but obviously its performance is going to be reduced when it's running over an IDE bus. But it should still be faster than the old hard drive anyway. At least, it should be in theory. The backup completed and I let the system reboot, and it was really slow. Like, maybe even slower than it was with the hard drive in it. So, yikes. It turns out it just needed a reboot, and then it was a lot faster than it was before, and a lot closer to what I would expect for an SSD. So it was time to run the numbers again, and, well, yeah, for a SATA SSD, these numbers aren't impressive, but compared to the old hard drive, it is a big improvement. I also ran PCMark again, and this time it scored 25,997. So, yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and say it's better. The drive did get pretty warm when it was doing the backup, which I'm not surprised about, but under normal use, it also seemed to run a lot cooler than the old hard drive. And of course, it's quieter. So I've been using this for the last couple days while I've been editing this video, and it has been working fine. But I do have to admit, I'm not a super big fan of the particular adapter I bought. Unfortunately, it just doesn't fit into this computer very well. As you can see, even when it's in the computer, it's clearly sticking out of the drive bay, and there's nothing I can do about that, unfortunately, because the plastic shell, I can't even get it out here, it's so tight in there, it just doesn't fit in this computer, which is a shame, because I like this setup a lot. I don't know how well you can see this, but the hard drive is pretty noticeably thinner than the shell here, which I suppose is contributing to it not fitting very well in this computer. You know, again, it is a problem with this specific thing. This was pretty cheap, so, you know, I probably don't have a whole lot of room to complain, and this isn't a rare part, so I could just buy a different one later on. I think, unfortunately, this is just kind of a drawback of how the drive is mounted in this computer. If this was mounted on the bottom of the computer, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. I could just skip the shell altogether. The PCB itself is fine. It's just because of how this goes in the computer, I need this thing. I mean, again, it works, and I'm gonna use it like this, but yeah, it's just not really that great. It also means, not that it matters because it is so tight in there, there's no way to screw this thing in, because with how much this thing is sticking out, the screw hole physically just will not line up with the chassis because it's just sticking out too much. And I guess luckily these ports here are still usable, but they're pretty noticeably recessed in there. For all I know, I could just 3D print another case that's a bit smaller, or buy a different one, or something like that. I haven't had any problems with the setup over the last couple days. It's obviously much faster than the old hard drive. Thermals seem better than they were too, which on this computer is absolutely something I will take, considering the hard drive is mounted just below the palm rest here. So any heat from the drive, you're gonna feel that on your palms. Yeah, I'm very conflicted about this whole thing, but this is going to be something I am probably going to consider on at least any machine of mine that is not complete trash because I am just sick of hard drives, to be honest. So, yeah, I think that's it.